1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Hi there guys, Tom Quayle here. Hope you're all doing very well indeed as ever, and I hope you enjoyed that little bit of playing at the beginning. That was me struggling to pick my way through All the Things You Are, great jazz standard. And the reason I was doing that is recently I've been thinking about memorizing chord changes. I've never been one of those guys that sat down and memorized 50, 100, 200, you know, the entire real book, whatever, of standards. I've always found that very difficult. And over the years, especially the last sort of 5 or 6 years, I've developed some strategies that I use to try and memorize chord changes, because this was always something I've struggled with. What I used to do in the past is when I was learning a standard or anything that I had to improvise over, is I would have some kind of basic strategies for learning the actual chord sequence and memorizing it, but they never really worked when it came to the improvisation side of things, where I had to manipulate fretboard in real time on the harmony. So for example, some of the things that I used to do is I would internalize the chord changes so I could say them really quickly. So All the Things You Are, for instance, in the original key, the changes would be F minor 7, B flat minor 7, E flat 7, A flat major 7, D flat major 7, D minor 7, G 7, C major 7, C minor 7, F minor 7, so on and so forth. So I could reel those chord changes off really, really quickly. And that seemed like, okay, well, now surely I know the chord progression because I can reel them off. And in my mind, I thought that was, a good enough position to be in where I could then play over the chord changes. Some other things I would do is I would play through the scales, for example. So I would try and memorize the kind of chord scale relationship. So I might do stuff like exercises like this, for example. Or arpeggios. Oops, excuse my horrible picking technique. So I might practice things like that basically, much slower than that. I'm kind of reeling through this fairly quickly. And again, I felt like I could run through those chord changes quite well. I might also sit down and actually play the chord changes themselves, and I would go through various grips. So I might go. And in doing so, again, I felt like I knew the changes, but every time I sat and played on a gig or jammed with somebody else, I would find that the changes would fairly quickly exit my brain when it came time for me to actually start improvising. And I think this is because what I was doing is I was practicing fixed entities that weren't either creative or were utilizing my ability to manipulate fretboard in real time on the fretboard. So what I mean by that is, as opposed to playing through scales, playing through arpeggios, these fixed structures, playing through chord grips, and I would learn, because the guitar is so visual, these physical kind of grips where maybe I would play shell voicings and it would look a very certain way in a particular key. So you get this kind of very visual descending motion this way. And you could play it various different ways. You might do it like this. You might do different voicings. But it was a very fixed kind of visual thing. There were only 2 or 3 different ways I would memorize it. When it came time to improvise, I had to be much more creative and I had to manipulate much more harmony on the fly, basically. And because I was engaging a different part of my brain at the same time as trying to bring the changes out of my kind of, wherever in the brain they reside, or not in my case, I always found it very difficult. So I never really practiced the scenario where I was trying to recall the changes whilst improvising. And the problem I think a lot of us have, especially as guitar players, because we play a very visual instrument, is that we we don't isolate enough of these skills. So we'll play the arpeggios, we'll play the scales, we'll play through the chord changes, we'll try to memorize those chord changes in our head in isolation, but then we don't isolate the idea of manipulating harmony in the fretboard at the same time as recalling those changes. We just go straight in and try and improvise, like I did at the beginning, okay? And then those chord changes exit the brain really, really quickly as the stress of having to stay in time, phrase well, make good note choices, have chord tones on strong beats starts to, have to become prevalent in our playing. And that's really difficult. There's a lot to balance there and a lot to kind of keep track of. And that's where I always struggled, okay? And I was always very frustrated with myself. So one of the solutions that I've found for this is to do what I call Bach jazz. So if you think about Bach, let's say this kind of a thing. That's a little, it's the E major sonata from the violins, sonatas and petitas. Just the opening phrase of it. And what's nice about that phrase is it very clearly outlines E major. And that's what Bach is all about. It's about constant streams of notes that outline chord changes. Now, what Bach didn't do a lot of is chromaticism. So in jazz, we have a lot of chromaticism. And that's where the vocabulary starts to come in and the phrasing, so on and so forth. What we want to do for this exercise today is ignore all of that vocabulary. Ignore good note choice. Ignore playing good lines. We just want to practice recalling the chord changes whilst trying to locate some notes that work on the fretboard, okay? And it's the art of making conscious note choices whilst also trying to recall the changes that is the kind of key skill that we're working on here in isolation. So we're not just trying to improvise and just try and play a great solo. We're actually just working on the recall of the changes, in this case F minor 7, B flat minor 7, E flat 7, A flat major 7, D flat major 7. If you've got iReal Pro or if you've got a real book, you'll be able to find the changes to all the things you are. And then basically just very slowly, almost out of time really, I'll go through the exercise in a second, trying to find notes that work and not worrying about the quality of the lines. What we're worrying about is trying to recall the changes and pick some notes on the fretboard. So we're practicing those two skills together. Another key thing here before I actually do this is I really, really, really recommend you think about this like a game of chess where you're 1 or 2 moves ahead, at least 1 move ahead. Very similar to sight reading on any instrument where you don't read the note you're on. You're reading, if you're reasonably good at sight reading, a few notes ahead. If you're very good at sight reading, if you're a professional sort of classical musician, you would read multiple bars ahead so that you're prepared and the fingerings work and so on and so forth. Well, in this case, you should be thinking about the next chord change before you play it, well before you play it, if you can get to that point, okay? So here's the exercise. I'm going to pick for every single every single chord that I'm going to play over in a given chord progression, in this case, All the Things You Are, 2 notes per chord, okay? Now I'm actually going to do this out of time. I'm not going to worry about time here. My goal is to get used to this thing of choosing notes whilst thinking ahead, what's the next chord that I need to play? So the first chord is F minor 7. Okay, now bear in mind I'm tuning all fourths, so I've got a C and an F here. Don't worry about the fingerings and what I'm playing, just the concept of it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to play the flat 3 and go down to the 5. Now if you struggle with fretboard visualization before we go through this exercise, if you struggle with this kind of finding flat 3s, 5s, 6s, 9s, whatever, check out my app Solo. You can check that out. There's a link down below that will help you to learn to visualize where all these intervals are on the fretboard and how they relate to chords and scales, so on and so forth. You can also check out the Ultimate Fretboard Visualization course, which I'll link down to below, which goes with Solo. And that's going to be a really great resource for anybody who struggles at this stage to find these notes. However, I'm going to take it as a given for this exercise that you can do this reasonably well out of time. So there's no metronome clicking in the background. I recall the chord, F minor 7, and then I'm going to start manipulating or finding harmony on the fretboard. So I'm going to play the flat 3, then the 5. Now as I'm finding those 2 notes, I'm thinking about what the next chord is. So I'm thinking B flat minor 7, then I'm going to find the flat 3. Now don't worry about how quickly you can do this. Now as I'm finding this flat 3, I'm going to find another note on the fretboard, but what I want to do is think about what the next chord is before I get to the end of finding this second note here. So I want to actually play for the B flat minor 7, the 5 again. So I'm going to play flat 3 down to 5. And at this point, I know already, because the recall here is trying to think a step ahead and thinking about that E flat 7, the next chord, okay? Now, if you can't do that and you have to stop and think, that's totally fine. The thing here is to get to the point where this starts to become this singular entity of, I can find these notes whilst thinking about the next chord. So it becomes kind of, you know, a really easy process of recalling the chord whilst also being able to find and manipulate these notes on the fretboard that you need for each of these chords. So I've got this. For the F minor 7, now I'm thinking, okay, B flat minor 7, E flat 7, A flat major 7, D flat minor, major 7. And now I'm thinking, I'm going to just go straight to G7, C major 7. Okay, now I'll do the next section. So C minor 7, F minor 7, B flat 7, and then E flat major 7, A flat major 7, A minor 7, D7, G major 7. So what you can see there is very slowly, and I'm doing it in time here, you should do it out of time really at first, is as I'm picking those notes, I'm also thinking about the next chord. I'm saying it out loud. Now that might be way too hard at first to say that next chord change out loud as you play. You might need to just do it in your head. But if you can verbalize it or audiate it out loud, that's even better. So again, it might be something like F minor 7, B flat minor, sorry, I'll start again. F minor 7, B flat minor 7, E flat 7, A flat major 7, D flat major 7, D minor 7, G7, sorry, C major 7. Okay, now I'm playing very simple things here, okay, very, very simple things. And the point, again, is not to play complex, difficult, flashy, you know, vocabulary-based lines. It's to play very, very simple harmony so that your brain has the chance to get used to picking notes whilst recalling the next chord. And again, thinking ahead here. Because the real key to getting good at playing over changes is to be able to have that next chord flag up well before you need it. If you're thinking about the chord that you're about to play over as it occurs, you can't have continuity with your lines, okay? So when I play through All the Things You Are, if I have 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. You can hear the changes going by there, and there's phrasing and there's continuity. It's because each of those chords is occurring in my brain at the same time as being able to manipulate the at the same time as being able to create those lines, essentially. So there's never a barrier to creativity, hopefully. And this was something I really, really struggled with for a long time, was this idea that I'd suddenly find myself with a blank in my mind. Okay, what is the next chord? And by the time I'd thought of it, it was too late. And then what I find is I'm playing by ear and sort of riding, you know, by the seat of my pants, basically, trying to hang on to the harmony, and it's not going to work. I don't have the kind of ear-based skills, the natural ear-based skills to be able to play exactly what's in my head. Even though I can hear my way through that harmony pretty well, I need to know what the next chord is before I play over it. So this kind of exercise is really, really useful for this. So start out super, super slow. Just play 2 notes on each chord. Don't play in time like I was doing, and try and recall that next chord before it happens. And if you can't, don't worry about it. Keep doing those other exercises where you try and recall them without playing the guitar. So again, sit down and memorize them by saying them out loud, audiate them. F minor 7, B flat minor 7, E flat 7, A flat major 7, D flat major 7, D minor 7, G7, C major 7. And you get them that quick, okay? And as you get more advanced with this, you can start to play more notes. So you might play 4 notes on each chord. And you end up, this is why I call this Bach jazz, because it starts to sound very much like Bach, like a very, very bad, poor version of Bach. So for All the Things You Are, for example, if I play 4 notes on each chord, Now, what I mean by that is 4 notes per bar. So effectively you're playing quarter notes, okay? You're respecting the chord progression, but playing quarter notes. Now, the thing here is, again, at first you might need to do this out of time. You're hearing me do all of this in time, but it might be like this. So F minor 7, B flat minor 7, E flat 7, and again 4 notes on each chord, A flat major 7. Don't worry about the quality of your lines. Don't worry about, effectively you can just stick to chord tones at first if you like, just real basic chord tones. The point is you're not playing fixed structures, like you're not doing this, you know. You're not playing these fixed arpeggios. You're actually making conscious note choices and being creative, but within very kind of, you're not worrying about how good the lines are that you're creating. You know, maybe just stick to chord tones and manipulate the fretboard just using chord tones. Maybe use some scalic lines, so on and so forth. The key is to be improvising whilst also recalling the next chord change before it occurs, okay? This is the skill that you're trying to develop, being able to manipulate the fretboard and improvise whilst thinking about that next chord change in advance. So you end up with this nice kind of bark-like sound. That's the idea, and again, I'm doing it in time here, I'm doing it quite fast, but this will mean that when you start to actually improvise and you've worked on your vocabulary, you've worked on your phrasing, you've worked on your time feel, all of these things separately, the thing that's not going to fail you is the ability to recall whilst improvising what that next chord change is. And that's the thing that always used to fail me. And you can do this with any standard, you can do it with any chord progression. Something like Little Wing, for example, would be great for this. You know, memorize the chords and then start to play very basic chord tones or lines through the chord changes. Just 2 notes on each chord, 4 notes on each chord. You could extend it up to be more notes if you want to. And again, start out of time. And then if you get good at this, you can start to do it in time as well. And always think like a chess player. Always think about the next chord before it happens, well in advance. And that's going to be almost impossible at first, but the more you practice it, the easier it's going to get. Okay, so I hope that helps, guys. I hope it makes sense. Hope you enjoyed some of the playing. As usual, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit like and subscribe down below. And let me reiterate again, if any of this fretboard visualization is difficult for you, check out Solo. I've got the t-shirt just here. Solo version 2.1 now is out for iOS devices, and also the Ultimate Fretboard Visualization course. If you go to the2pointsystem.com, you can check out the course that David Beebe and I put out recently. Yeah, it's been very interesting to see some of the feedback from you guys. It seems to be something that you guys are really enjoying. So thank you to anyone who's checked it out. You'll find down below all the links to all of my stuff, including the course and Solo, and all of my website courses as well. And yeah, hopefully you guys will find some of that useful. Hope you enjoyed the video. Click the bell to be notified every time I upload a new video, and I will see you all in the next one. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you have some great time practicing. See you soon. Bye-bye.